Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining myself, Sal Alessia, and Eleonora Ferrante. It's just 7 p.m. now. I do want to give some people a little bit of time to log in. Hopefully, they're not having any trouble with the registration link, but we're going to wait a couple of minutes and then we'll get started with the program. So thanks for joining tonight. All right, it's just a couple minutes after 7 p.m., so I'd love to get started with the session tonight. This is our first webinar. Basically, myself and Eleanor Ferrante, I'll have her introduce herself in one moment, but tonight's presentation is what you need to know before you take your child to visit any colleges. And in speaking with Eleonora previous to tonight, my understanding is a lot of parents start to take children to see campuses and colleges even over the summer, whether it's they're going into their senior year or they're maybe still in their junior or sophomore year. But the summer seems to be a time when people start to actually go out there and visit some of the colleges. So before we get started, Eleanor, if you don't mind, just give a brief overview of your background and let the audience know, what your expertise is, and we'll get right into the presentation.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sal, for having me today. I'm the owner of Square Peg, Square Hole Coaching. That is a college admissions and career coaching firm. So, we work with students from ages 15 through adults in their mid to upper 20s. In high school, I help the students figure out what it is that they're good at, what are the things they're interested in, and help them plan for applying to the colleges that are the right fit for them. We're going to talk a lot about that, Sal, in terms of all the different things that you need to be aware of when you're looking at schools to make sure they fit properly. My background comes from a pretty wide range. I did a lot in terms of corporate America and a lot of volunteer work through our local schools. So I have a nice background for helping kids figure out who they are and getting them into the right schools.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. What I'd like to do is just start with our first polling question. I like to kind of make sure that we can keep the audience engaged. So the first one we're going to start with is, has anyone visited? Is it going? Can you see it or no? All right, let me see if I have to turn this. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. I thought I shared it. Let me see.
And while Sal's pulling that up, when you start visiting schools, summer a lot of times is the time that you have the most time to start visiting schools,
Okay, here
right?
we
But
go.
let's talk about also what it is that you're going to need to consider as you're doing that.
All right, so the poll should be up now. Do you see it on your
I
side,
do.
Eleanor? Okay, great. Excellent. All right, we're getting some answers. So yeah, it looks like a lot of the people haven't actually visited any colleges yet. So this is perfect timing to be hosting this this presentation tonight so that they can go well prepared before they start
Great.
visiting. Okay. Would you prefer that I start to share your
That
slides at
would be
this
great.
point so that we can get right into it?
So,
Okay, perfect. Let me do that.
and what I'll be talking about is, I know most of you are concerned about how are you getting into these schools, right? So things to think about as you're going to visit the schools and what's important to know. But it's things that you should be thinking about before you actually schedule your first visit. So, in terms of what you should be looking at, it's really what are the colleges going to be looking at. So Sal, if you would.
Yep.
So there are a few things that the schools are looking for. Some of these may not be a surprise to you. They're looking for a strong GPA, rigorous coursework. This next one might be a little bit of a surprise, though. A lot of people think more is better in terms of activities, but that's definitely not the case. Might have been a number of years ago. I remember when my kids were applying to college. My son was applying back in 2014, so a number of years ago now. They talked about being well-rounded, but now the schools are looking for something a little bit different. So we'll go into that. The essay has become much more important these days. Used to be people would say that they weren't really reading the essays, but admissions officers now are all reading the essay. Recommendation letters are critical. And then scores. How important are they? And of course, lastly, students who bring something to the party, and that something can be very varied depending on who you are. So let's get into first taking a look at the transcript. So Sal, two main pieces when you look at the transcript that the colleges are really reviewing closely. One of them is your GPA, and the second is the classes that you've taken. So the first question I get asked a lot is, well, what's the difference between weighted and unweighted GPA, and how is it calculated? So when you get your student's report card, the grades you see on the report card are unweighted. It's just the flat out grade. But what happens then is if your student is taking an AP, an honors level, a college level class, many schools, I don't actually know any who don't any longer, will weight that higher, right? Because it's more rigorous, it's more difficult, there's a lot more expected of the kids. So what they're trying to do is put in some sense of fairness into the GPA that the colleges get to see. That would be the weighted GPA. While that's really great, problem is that a lot of colleges undo all that work, right? And so maybe you have 100 in gym. That's lovely, and it might bring your GPA up. But I can guarantee MIT is taking that out of the equation when they're trying to figure out what your child's GPA is. So what they're really looking for are the major subjects, and if your child has a special talent, whether it be art, performance, whatever it might be, if they've taken classes in those electives, those they'll look at as well. So that brings the question of what classes should you take? And my answer is always the most rigorous that makes sense for you. So I have some students who will take 6 to 8 APs in 1 year. And I have some students that will never touch an AP. And so it really depends on who you are, what type of student you are, what's available to you at your school. One of the students I work with in Manhattan, she doesn't have any AP classes. It's a very nice private school. The education is outstanding. They don't have honors. They don't have APs. Everybody gets the same rigorous education. So take what makes sense for you and take what's interesting to you, because you never know what that's going to bring to light, right? I have kids all the time taking what their parents consider to be kind of a throwaway class, and all of a sudden they're like, I really like that. And maybe I want to try that in college. Yeah. So the transcript is one piece. The next piece, though, that's really important are your activities, right? And so for me, I always say, Sal, if we go to the next one.
You know what? Before we jump onto that, Eleanor, and this I'm going to say selfishly because I have a son that just finished his freshman year. So with the what classes should you take? One of the questions that's coming up now is that he's interested in getting an interbaccalaureate degree, and so he's going to have to take a very specific path. Primarily, that wouldn't start until 11th grade anyway, but in 10th grade, he needs to get these other classes completed before he'd even be eligible. Do you hear anything about the IB programs and how the colleges sort of treat that as well?
So IBs, for those of you who don't know, is similar to an AP type of regimen, except for the fact that it's a very structured process. You'd have to take certain classes and it leads to an IB diploma. It requires project work. It requires certain coursework to be completed. Like APs, you get tests along the way that all lead towards that diploma. So, and I'm going to back up one step, because what you said is really important. He has to take things in 10th grade in order to allow him to take them in 11th and 12th. So I find that students sometimes get pushed out of classes that they might want to take because they weren't in that track to start with. And it's really frustrating, right? So even in middle school, sometimes you need to be thinking ahead and giving your child the best opportunity, again, for what fits them best. Colleges, to your question, though, look at AP, college level classes, IB classes in a very similar light. It's the most rigorous coursework that's available typically at a high school. And for those students who can make their way all the way through the IB and get the diploma, what that really showcases a lot of times too is not only their ability to do some kind of project, but their writing, right? Because IB has a very large component of it is writing. And so those students, I find, tend to write at a higher level a lot of times.
Okay, great.
Right, so,
all right, here we go.
Activities. And here's the most important thing. Do what you love. Right? So don't do the soup kitchen because everybody's doing the soup kitchen. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago for college advisors, and I was listening to admissions officers from Villanova, Carnegie Mellon, and Swarthmore. And the most interesting thing I heard was that if every student who put down on their application, if they worked at Habitat for Humanity, actually did, there would be no homeless people. Okay.
Right.
Just a thought, right? So students are putting down and volunteering at places that they think the colleges want to see. And that's not what the colleges want, right? They want you to volunteer at places that make sense. Get a job at Carvel or at Home Depot. It's great because it shows responsibility, right? And that you're doing something where you are showing up, getting a job done, and being useful. Learn. There's so many great classes online these days. You don't have to go take the pre-med class at Brown over the summer if you want to learn about pre-med. There's classes on YouTube, Masterclass, Coursera. There's so many things. Go out and learn. And then create. If you're an artist, you're a performing artist, go out and create. Have a good time because that's what carries over. Okay. So now that you've done that, we're looking at the essay. And the essay really needs to talk about you. I don't want to hear about your grandmother, as lovely as she might have been, right? But who are you and what do you want to showcase to the colleges? Remember, they're going to see the rest of your application. So it doesn't need to be just a repeating of your activities or your grades or the courses. That's someplace else. Use this as a way to open the window into who you are so that people can see who you are and get a better feel. Be creative. It doesn't need an intro, body, and conclusion. It is not an English paper. It is not a DBQ, right? This is a space to really express yourself. Of course, along with the essay, we're also looking at recommendation letters, right? So the 3 people who tend to write them, your guidance counselor always submits one into the school, right? And that gives you a chance to talk about your background. Obviously, the academics, you're going to have your teachers, typically 1 STEM, 1 humanities. But again, if you're going for performing arts, visual arts, having one of your art teachers, having a world language teacher, that could be really important here. And you also have the opportunity for a lot of schools to put in an other recommendation. Somebody who knows you out of the classroom, a coach, an advisor, the person you work for at Carvel, right? Somebody who sees you in a little bit of a different light. And again, open a window into who you are. Because the whole idea behind the recommendation letter is to showcase your character, your leadership, right? Who you are. And in the terms of your counselor, perhaps a backstory. I have a lot of kids who have stories that they don't want to write about in their essay, but need to be told, right? So maybe you have an IEP, maybe you have, you moved a lot, maybe you were bullied, whatever your story might be, a health issue that you want the colleges to know about, but you don't want to say yourself, your guidance counselor can really be an asset here. Right? Of course, the big question of the day is always ACT, SAT. And should we do it? And should we go test optional? So Sal, I don't know about your kid.
Yeah, we have that. Yeah, we have that poll too.
So I'm curious to see, a lot of the students who are coming up now have not taken any of the big tests. Right? So I'm kind of curious if everybody let me know, are you planning to go test optional? Do you even know what that means? A lot of the schools, you're hearing this these days, kids are telling me all the time, I don't have to take the SAT, I don't have to take the ACT. Well, I hate to tell you that may not be the case. there are still some schools out there that are requiring it. So test optional versus test blind. The California schools have got test blind. That means if you send a score, they don't look, right? They're blind to it. Test optional means if you send it, they will look, right? So typically you send a test score if it is within the mid-range or higher for a particular school, right? If your score is going to be on the lower end, then you don't send it. So in terms of which...
Now, I hate to be cynical here. Right?
Go.
But, and maybe I'm asking a question that others have as well. But I mean, let's face facts. If you don't send the test result, do the schools that are test optional presume that it was a lower than expected grade?
So the answer is it depends. For those schools who are newer to the test optional world, you are recalculating how your brain works when you read these applications now. So the first couple of years, of course, right? I mean, they're going to know why wouldn't you send the score?
Yeah.
But I will say that many of the schools, and I'll just pick on American for the moment, they have been test optional for so long, I can't even tell you when they switched over, right?
Okay.
So for them, the test is just an extra data point. If you don't send it, they go, hey, they don't test well. Let's move on, right?
Okay.
Other schools, though, so in terms of which schools are test optional, let's take a look at MIT. MIT was test optional, and they were like, you know what, that test is an important component for us. So they definitely still were thinking you didn't score well, right? So if you're curious as to which schools are test optional, I'll suggest you take a look. It's called fairtest.org. They keep a running list of all the schools, because schools like MIT, Georgetown, if you want to go to University of Florida, Florida State, Georgia Tech, they all require test scores. So I see from the poll that most of you kind of go between, is your child unsure, or no, they're not going to, or no, they're not planning to go test optional. So very wide range there, right? I think if you have a chance to take the test, you should. You don't have to send a score you're not proud of to the schools. And sometimes a really high score is still not high enough for a school, and sometimes a really low score is high enough. I have sent 1,000 to a school, and I have not sent a 1450. Right? Yeah, because it really depends on who you are and how you test it for those particular schools. Right? So that leads to then really what's the crux of the matter for the colleges which is what do you bring to the party, right? So when you look at a school, and let's take Harvard for a second, right? It's one of my favorite terms now, is the highly rejectives. Out of 100 applications that are sent, they reject 97. That is a crazy number. The flip side is if you apply to University of Kentucky, out of 100 applications, they accept 96. And University of Kentucky is a great school, especially if you want equine or anything, agriculture wise, business. They have a ton of great programs, nursing, direct entry, right? So you can't judge it based on that. Right? But then the question is, well, what are these colleges looking for in terms of the profile? So they want to see who you are academically. It could be, I had this this past season with University of Miami. I had 3 kids apply: international relations, psychology, and stage management. My stage management kid was lower academic profile than the other 2. He was the one that got in because they need stage management majors this year. Now, don't apply to the University of Miami for stage management unless you really want it. That's not the point, right? But what are they looking for in terms of majors? Demographics. Do they really need somebody from Long Island? Do they need somebody from North Dakota? Do they need a 6'1", tuba player this year? Right. So what are they looking for?
But how are the students supposed to know that information? I mean, other than working with somebody like yourself.
That's the thing. You really can't find that. Right. You have to.
Okay.
I have a pretty good feel for what the schools are looking for year to year. I stay in close contact with admissions officers just for the reason, because it is tough to tell. Right. A great way to do it, though, for those of you who are going on a visit, is to ask when you get there, my child is interested in psychology. What percentage of students who apply here apply for psychology? Do you have if it's a really specific major like stage management, right? How many freshmen, juniors, seniors do you have in the program, right? And if they're telling you that they have no freshmen or sophomores, well, chances are they might want you if you fit the rest of their profile. Right? Your character. The one thing I heard over and over from admissions officers this past season was, we really want kind students. thought, well, that's interesting, right? So beyond everything else, they want people who are cooperative, who work collaboratively with the others, who really are there for the benefit, not just of themselves. And so I thought that was a really telling piece of what they're starting to see and looking for. So your personality can come across in that when you go on a visit, when you meet with admissions, whether you're on a college tour, a college fair, or you're doing the info sessions online, let your personality shine through. I know that's what helped my son get into, he got into every school he applied to. And I know he had some one-on-ones in those sessions where the colleges come to campus, to the high school campus.
Yeah.
Take full advantage of that, because most times it's a very small group of students who are there, and you can have what I'll call an informal interview and really showcase who you are.
Right.
Show your passion, right? Do you absolutely love playing the tuba? Are you a dancer? Do you love to serve others? And so the soup kitchen really is your space, right? Are you a phenomenal football player, right? What's your talent, right? What can you bring? I was just at Muhlenberg this past 2 weeks ago visiting. They're a great school for the arts, but you can major in anything, but they still want kids who love the arts, right? If you're in marching band, they might really need a marching band kid at Maryland this year, right? And so that's what they're looking for to fill in the pieces. So it's overall, you have to look at all of those things to say, this is what I'm presenting to the school. This is what they're looking for. Of course, the other side of this equation is the school a good fit for you? Right? This is one of those times, it's not just about the school and the name. Harvard might have a great name, but is that the t-shirt you want to be wearing May 1st of your senior year? Is it the right fit academically, socially, financially? So let's dive into academic first. When you're looking at that, you want to make sure that it has the majors and programs that you want. So Sal, if you would. Right? I've had kids who say to me, I want to apply to UNC Chapel Hill. I'm like, that's great. They don't have your major. Right. So you might look lovely as a Tar Heel in light blue, right? But that's not going to be the school that you want. So do they have the programs that you need? What about admissions requirements? Do you have all the things that they're looking for? Did you take the languages that they're looking for? Did you take the math that they need? Key piece here, if you're going for STEM, take math and science all the way through for 4 years. Really critical. Don't let somebody convince you out of that. Right? How do you fit relative to their freshman profile? What are your scores? What are your grades? What are the classes you've been taking? What's the academic rigor of their program? So do you want to be at the top of your class? Would you want to be in an honors program there? Or would you be better suited being down a little bit lower, right? So you like that competition to go up. I work with some kids, they need to be at the top of their class. That's just, they feel most comfortable there. They're getting that interaction with professors they really love, and that's the right space for them. I have other students who know that if they don't have somebody ahead of them, they're not chasing, right? And so they need that fit. Some schools are more competitive. Some are a little bit more laid back. What's your academic feel? Do you like big lectures? Are you better with discussion? So you want to make sure that you are getting what you need out of that college academically. The other thing you want to look at is socially, right? Do they have the activities that you want, the setting that you want? What's the campus vibe, right? So I work with some kids who are very conservative and some who are very liberal. They are not looking for the same schools, right? If your kid is on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, highly recommend you check out Campus Pride, right? It's a great source for what are the schools that my kid might be most comfortable at. A little tidbit here, Ithaca is a great space, has a lot of great programs, and it's one of the top ones on Campus Pride. Right? Do you want to be outside in a nice outdoorsy place? Do you want to be in a city? Do they have dance or debate or fencing? What are the things that you want that are critical? And do they have it? And is that student body look and feel the way you want them to? And I'm not just talking about the way that you physically look, right? Although for some kids that's important, right? So you need to know yourself. Do you want to be able to go to religious services? Do they have it? Do you need kosher meals, right? So what are the things that are important to you, and how do you find that? Last but not least, and I'm going to let Sal really dive into the next piece, which is the financial fit. But needless to say, you have to understand what's your estimated family contribution, right? What do the schools expect you to be able to pay? And I'll give you another little hint. It's probably not what you think you can pay. And Sal's going to talk to all that. What's the true net price?
Yes.
If you live in Long Island and you're going to go to school in Arizona, don't forget to factor in flying and staying in a hotel, right? If you're the parents. Can you afford it? And what's the ROI? Because I tell my parents, do not sell your house, give up your retirement, do any of those things for your kid to go to college. There's 4,000 colleges in this country. There are plenty of schools who want your kid at the right price. And with that, I'm going to let Sal really dive into this because, for me, all those aspects of working with an IEC, an independent education consultant like myself, the things we bring are knowledge, experience, and direction. So whether you're on the financial side like Sal or more on the admission side like myself, those are the key aspects of what we have that we can share with you.
Awesome. Eleanor, that was great. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure we put up your slide here. And later on, we're going to talk a little bit before we let everybody go about what's the best way to contact you and reach out to you if they want to take advantage of an offer that I know you're going to make available towards the end of this presentation. Let me go into another poll here before I sort of shift into my own. Let me take your slides out for the moment. And okay. So this one I like to start just because it's going to make an easy transition into what I'm about to speak about. And I'll get my slides going up here as we get it. Okay, so I'm starting to see some answers to the poll. Nothing for 0 to 10,000, so that's actually a positive as far as savings are concerned. That is a good sign. It means people are pretty on point in regard to what it costs currently now to send our children to higher education. So just by a brief introduction, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sal Alessia. I am a wealth manager with Morgan Stanley and also a certified college financial consultant. I got that certification last summer. Selfishly, my 8th grader was going into his freshman year in high school. And I said, you know what, if I need to learn this for myself, I should probably be able to do this for my clients as well. So when I talk about what I'm looking at as far as exactly sort of piggybacking on what Eleonora just talked about is, okay, great, there are these wonderful schools out there. And one of them is ultimately going to be a fit for your child or student. But when we start to go down this path, and this is why I think it's ultimately critical for doing this prior to actually going to see these campuses. The hypothetical or example that I use all the time is you wouldn't bring your child to go test drive a Ferrari only to let them know that you have a Toyota budget, right? So why let them go through or visit these college campuses if you know that in reality a private college is probably not going to be in the budget? And so what we found is that currently right now, and this is a study that's been done over the last maybe 15, 20 years, it goes back to 2015, but 73% of parents who have children under 18, their number one financial concern is, how am I going to pay for my child's college? And it continues that way. And quite frankly, in regard to, I know everybody's talking about inflation and how it appears at the gas pump right now, and we're all feeling that. But just as an aside, college tuition and costs are the only costs that have increased on average every single year more than 6% for the last 25 years. So that number continues to grow and grow. As I mentioned before, Generation X, which is myself and my contemporaries, we have the kids that are nearing college and about to take that on, and ultimately over the next 10 years are going to be our respective earning years, right? So we're going to be able to earn the most money. We have to make a choice. Where do we allocate those funds? Is it towards continuing the down payment, towards the path of a 529 plan? And that's what most people talk about. Are there other strategies where we can actually put money aside and still have it earmarked in our minds for paying for college tuition, but not necessarily be mandated to do that, right? So what if a child ultimately decides they don't really want to go for higher education? Maybe they go to a trade school, maybe they go to some other, they could be an entrepreneur, and the parent may want to support them in starting that startup business. What do we do with that? So one of the things that we come across, and within my team at Morgan Stanley, I'm part of a 7-person team. By way of background, I am an attorney by trade. I practiced law for about 15 years, so not necessarily the most traditional path towards wealth management, financial planning, but I utilize my skills and background as an attorney to help with my clients looking at the big picture. So I joke and say more than 60 to 70% of my day has nothing to do with investing assets. It's really more about making sure that the people who are trying to go down these respective paths, whether it's retirement planning or some of these other ones, college being the one for this particular presentation tonight, how are we going down that path in the most cost-effective and efficient manner? So this is an interesting statistic. I don't know if you've seen this. Again, it's dated. It's right before the pandemic went into full force and effect. But on average, 4 million students are expected to graduate high school on a year-to-year basis, and 68, almost 69% of them are going to immediately enroll in college. So that means, as a Gen Xer, if you haven't planned in advance, this issue about how you're going to pay for college is going to be front and center, and we have to figure out what are the ways to do that. So I want to launch another poll, which is really sort of asking, how do you anticipate, if you've done any planning whatsoever, and many of my clients haven't, which is totally fine, what are the available options out there as far as how you're going to ultimately finance this? So, many of my clients have done it. I have some that are very proactive. They start when their child is born. They open the 529 plan. They put in a certain dollar amount. If you're here in New York State, you're allowed to contribute up to $10,000 a year total, whether you have one child, two children, three children. You can, of course, contribute more than $10,000 a year, but you're only going to get a deduction against your taxable income up to that $10,000 cap. So ultimately, if you just limit yourself to that, if you start when the child's born and you do it for 18 years, you're going to be able to accumulate 180,000 without even any appreciation for the investments themselves. So you should be good. I will tell you that the vast majority of my clients probably don't even start thinking about this until 9th or 10th grade. And by that point, we're just not going to have enough time to be able to get to the stage where we need to fund the full amount for college. So the other options, obviously, I'm sorry, Eleanor, you sound like you have a
I was
question.
just thinking, when I think about also, consider how much college could cost you, right? So if you go to an in-state public university, right, even if you pay the full ticket price, you may be paying 100, 150,000, right? If you're living,
you anticipated my next slide.
Because you're on campus, right? If you're living there, right? But if you're going to a private institution, I mean, Sal, the numbers I'm hearing are terrifying to me.
Yes. So right now, just so you're aware how we incorporated it. So I just did this with a relatively young couple. They're in their mid to late 30s. They have two children. The older is 6, the younger is 4. And they want to be able to save enough to pay for the college from their own personal savings. So we are estimating in today's dollars, and of course I have to project this out now for another 14 or 15 years, for a private institution, the sticker price is between $72,000 and $75,000 a year.
And I will tell you this.
And that could be plus the other stuff that comes along with it.
Yeah, because I already have kids who are paying, easily 300,000, right? And then that's kind of the full thing. But that's when you start to look at those schools that don't like to give money, that don't like to help out, right? So it's a really critical thing. When I look at the other aspects that you have here, you're right. These are things you have to consider, because the schools don't always tell you about these.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think we talked about this last week. I got a new client whose child just got into Quinnipiac. And when I got the offer letter, it did include a merit scholarship, whereby they basically gave $20,000 per year for 4 years, which I thought was pretty incredible. That being said, after you reduce that, the parents, because their EFC or expected family contribution came out in the mid 70s, their ticket price is still going to be $44,000 a year. And unfortunately, in this particular circumstance, the husband had lost his job during the pandemic, didn't work for almost 2 years. So any of those opportunities that they would have been able to continue to contribute towards the savings were ultimately lost. So we're looking at ways on different ways that we can ultimately finance it. This particular client is a veteran, so the military and some of they actually have some pretty aggressive. He's going through the Navy Federal Credit Union, a pretty aggressive way where they'll essentially write you the loan to fund the whole thing. My question is that the right decision? right? Going back to your question, your statement before about the ROI. And that's one of the things that I like to talk about with the clients as well. So this was a study actually Discover. I know everybody knows them as the credit card company. They are very active in the student loan space as well. 65% of the parents are worried about the increase in cost of college. So as I mentioned before, private institution tuition currently right now is at $72,000 to $75,000 per year, and that's been increasing on average about 6% per year. So if you look at that, if you're not going to college for another 5 years, you're talking about an increase of 30%.
Right.
It's
It is
staggering.
staggering. And then depending on where you choose to go to school. So my son went to school in Boston, right? And when you live off campus, not every school has a space
Cost
for
of
you to live
living.
on campus all the time. So you have to take that into account too. It's not
Yes,
just the room and board that they tell you for living on campus. You live in Boston anywhere, it's thousands of dollars more than it is on campus.
exactly. Yeah, and that was I'm a graduate of Villanova. I know you
Hmm.
mentioned Villanova before, but I don't even want to admit how long ago it was that I went there. Many of the dorms that are currently there were not even built. But when I did go there, they only guaranteed housing for your freshman year, and they told us that right out of the box. I was lucky to get housing for the second year, my sophomore year, but after that we were on our own, and it was challenging. There's no question about it. So here are the things that I think sort of jump out a little bit, right? We have grown up with this ideology, right? Which is college education is part of the American dream. I remember, my parents, they were the first in their family to get a college education. So it was almost like a foregone conclusion that myself and my sister were going to be going to college, where we had no idea, but that was going to happen. Now it's almost like a mandate. I feel, and again, I hear some of my friends and family like, well, I want my child to go into the trades. I don't necessarily think that they need a college education. There's statistics that are going to show that you are severely going to limit their potential for generating income if you do that. That being said, during the pandemic, I'm sure general
Mhm.
contractors and carpenters and plumbers and electricians were doing really,
Yeah.
really well during
But
that
keep in
period.
mind too, but they still have to
Um,
know how to run a business. So at a minimum, even having business
correct.
classes, even an associate's degree that gives them those business skills are critical, because if you're not invoicing and getting the money back, it doesn't matter how good you are as a contractor because you're not getting
True.
paid.
That is 100% true. I used to joke and say that when I was a practicing attorney, I had my own law practice, and the practice of law and the business of law, two very different things. We did not get taught in law school how to run a law firm or what would be the day-to-day operations. They taught us how to think like lawyers, but ultimately I had to learn that on the fly to a certain degree, or,
Mhm.
or through mentors and other people that were willing to share and help with that. And then the other part that I see at this stage, and I'm glad that you mentioned how many schools there are actually out there. There are so many schools that you don't have to pay, another mortgage to be able to finance it, just to get the same, or in certain circumstances, better education for your particular student. The other one I want to kind of poll that I want to throw out here right now is because I usually get a lot of people that say yes to this, and I'm curious whether or not the audience we have tonight, because there's a lot of parents that, for one reason or another, feel that their child is going to be eligible for the full ride scholarship, whether it's through athletics or academics or whatever the case may be. And I think it's imperative for people to know out there that the likelihood of somebody getting a full ride is minute. I think it's less than 3%, if I'm not mistaken, of students actually get a full ride for scholarship, tuition, and everything else that comes along with it. And ultimately, and one of the programs that I use, and Eleonora, you and I talked about this, is when I take our clients through the process, and once the student has sort of worked with someone like yourself and figured out, okay, these are the 5 or 6 schools that I actually feel is a good fit for me, then I'll take that as sort of the handing of the baton and say, okay, well, of these 4 or 5 schools, based upon your personal budget, which one of these is going to live up to your expectations, so that at the end, hypothetically, let's say that the student wants to go for business. I'll use the example that we talked about earlier with Quinnipiac. So I can show that a student that graduates from Quinnipiac with a 4-year degree in business has a substantial likelihood of making $3,400 a month in income. But if we finance the bulk of that, and most of these financing opportunities are typically paid back over a 10-year period once the child has actually graduated. That monthly loan bill is going to be between $1,200 to $1,400 a month. So if you're paying $1,400 a month just servicing the debt, and you're making $3,400 a month, that leaves you $2,000 for the month for everything else. Is that necessarily the best choice? And maybe there are other ways that we can ultimately sort of mitigate that. That's really the critical part about
Right.
the
And I
planning.
think that's the piece that where I come in a lot too with that aspect is understanding who you are relative to those schools so that I can give you a feel for you do stand a reasonable chance of getting a scholarship at this school because you have this characteristic, right? Whether it's a talent, it's your academics, whatever it might be, that those schools are looking for. And there are plenty of schools that will do that for you. And I love this slide, Sal, because it's really
I wanted to throw this up here. It's a little dated. It's back from 19 and 20. It's only gotten worse, quite frankly. But I like to show this so that people have a real understanding of what are these true sticker prices, because a lot of times they don't get these details until after the application process has already been done, and they get sticker shock. And I go back and use that analogy that I said. Well, if you go test drive a Ferrari, you can't be surprised that it's $300,000 when you get the sticker. Again, I try to get updated data as much as I possibly can. This is the last time that that they publish stuff like this. And look, the schools don't necessarily want everybody to know that. I think they're intentionally vague on the way that they come up with some of these pricing and stuff of that nature. And they're in a competitive landscape, right? So ultimately, they want you to get accepted if you have the academics and everything else that go along with that to be a productive part of the student body, and then you'll figure out later how to pay for it. That's the part that I take a lot of exception with, So in my world, and one of the things that I've seen is truly a gap when we talk about financial planning, specific to the college financial planning, which is what really was the impetus for me to become that certified college financial counselor, is most financial advisors, and this is why I'm intentionally distinguishing myself, do not talk about anything other than a 529 plan. And that's really sort of their only tool in the shed that they utilize. But, working with someone like myself who has gone through and ultimately gotten the knowledge that can be imparted onto the clients, and working with them, 2, 3, possibly even 4 years in advance of their child going to school. I mean, here's something that I learned throughout my education becoming the CCFC. If you have 2 children in school at the same time, the colleges will give you credit for that. They'll actually negotiate a lower tuition payment, recognizing that your overall bill is increasing. You know what I mean? So with this one in particular, the Quinnipiac one that I keep using, there's a second child that's a sophomore right now. So when I did the projections, I showed that in years 3 and 4, junior and senior, for the current child that going to school, their tuition could potentially go down, and Quinnipiac actually acknowledged that. Most parents don't even know about it, or you don't even know to ask for it. They don't necessarily just offer it because of the circumstances. So that's something that's imperative. These are the types of services that I will provide if clients are working with me. The FAFSA, that's the financial aid form that everyone has to fill out, whether or not you're anticipating that you're going to be eligible for financial aid. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Eleonora, most schools are going to require that you fill out those forms, whether or not you're, even if you're a high net worth individual, you're still going to have to go
Yeah,
through
a
that
lot of schools are
process.
requiring it if the person wants to have even merit aid. And for those of you who are planning or would like to potentially get some kind of loan, right? Even if you don't quote unquote need it, you need the FAFSA for it, or if you're looking for work study, you have to have a FAFSA.
So, and that's from my perspective, that's step one, really, with us trying to help you fill that out in the most appropriate way. I know that there's, videos or online ways that they try and walk you through the process, but, from my experience, it gets very convoluted and somewhat overwhelming. What are the type of assets that I should be including? Which ones do I not need to include? Is the equity in my home something that's going to be counted against me, and stuff of that nature? So these are the types of things that we kind of walk them through to ultimately get through that. The other part of it is, this should be one part of your overall global financial planning, right? So if you're setting aside and sort of project number one is, I got to figure out how I'm going to pay for my kids' college. Okay, great. But that should be part of an overall financial plan. The things that I look at when we talk about ways to budget for college costs, sometimes one of the things that we talk about is maybe you don't want to go and take on the Parent Plus loan or to have the student take on a significant amount of debt or go to a private lender. Are there ways that we can actually afford to pay for it with the parent's current cash flow? Meaning, instead of that money going into a 529 plan, can we actually have that money dedicated so that we can contribute and sort of lessen that burden and mitigate the amount that ultimately needs to be borrowed? And then at some point in the future, whether it's the parents that plan on paying for that, even if the loans are taken out by the child, or the child is intending to do that as well, we can talk about strategies on what's the best way to ultimately go down that path. So as far as my presentation is concerned, I'm going to open it up to Q&A. We have this chat box here. While people are open to fill out any questions, and I can ask the questions myself, both myself and Eleonora wanted to make an offer to everybody that attended the webinar tonight. So I'm going to share Eleanor's first, and she has offered to anyone that is interested to give a 30-minute free consultation. If you click on the link that should have just popped up on your screen, that'll take you to her website where you can fill out your information and based upon that, hopefully schedule some time to speak with her. And I'm going to make the same offer. I'm willing to speak with any of the people that participated tonight. That if you wanted to schedule a meeting with me or a phone call primarily, that we would be willing to do a 30-minute consultation to talk about your particular circumstances. Sometimes the people that attend the webinars are not comfortable sort of asking those questions right now, and we totally recognize that. And while we have that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Eleanor, did you see any questions come up on your side that you thought might be appropriate?
Yeah, so somebody was asking in terms of how to get the scholarships that are there. And so, Sally, there's the two sides to it. When I look at scholarships for students, I think about a lot of times their talent, right? And what are those kind of things that make you special, whether maybe you're first gen, like I said, maybe you have a special talent in terms of your dance, you write, whatever it might be. Maybe you volunteer at your local temple, church, or whatever. So you have to be really aggressive with this and go looking for them, because scholarships don't just fall into your lap. Even the scholarships that the schools offer, you have to apply for a lot of them at times, right? And people think, oh, I'll just be offered a scholarship, but that's not really the case. You have to look on their websites under their financial aid package page to get a feel for, well, I didn't realize I need to do this and this and this in order to be eligible for it. But I will offer just one piece of advice on that. Just keep in mind, some schools don't stack. So Sal, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the stacking of scholarships and what that means on financial aid side. Right?
So you get to take one. You don't get to take the multiples. And I'm so glad that you brought that point up, because the software that we utilize in sort of the financial planning component, once the parent and or the child have uploaded all their information, primarily what you're ultimately going to be putting in on the FAFSA anyway, so a lot of the financial information, but it also does request the student's GPA and whether or not they have any assets and stuff of that nature. Our program, once we take you through that process, will actually highlight scholarships that the student is eligible for. You still have to go and apply for it, as you mentioned before, but we'll be able to tell you which scholarships you're eligible for at that particular institution based on the data and information that you put into our system. And it's pretty robust. It has a lot of information that's updated on a regular basis. And so to your point, though, if you're eligible for a $20,000 scholarship and you also got the Italian American scholarship for $1,000, don't take that one because it's going to ultimately preclude you from taking the $20,000 one. So I don't know if every school is like that. I would venture to guess that that might be the general gist of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things you need to be
Yeah, and you have to
concerned
check
about.
and see. And I will say some of the scholarship processes, I just had one, she was the runner-up for a full ride at her school. Killed us that she was so close and didn't actually get it,
Oh,
right?
wow.
But she had to create a video, she had to do an essay, she had to do an interview, and then she had it was like a 3-hour session that she had to do. So it was a lot of work because it was a full ride. And the schools were looking for
Yeah.
specific things because those students, especially the ones that get full rides, are the ones that they're going to be helping them advertise their school afterwards, right? There is a little bit of an expectation there. So it's something definitely you want to keep in mind with that as you do that.
That was great. The other thing that I remember a lot of times that they're asking for is, you know, the students, if they go for the loans themselves, they're going to be essentially capped at certain amounts. I think usually the max is anywhere between $27,000 and $30,000 over a 4-year period. And so a lot of times there's still this gap. And I get this question a lot, which I think it came up earlier about, you know, these Parent Plus loans, like how do I apply for that and what are the criteria? I have a love-hate relationship with them because the love part is that as long as you have good credit, and I would venture to guess, you know, the majority of people that are applying for these loans would, your ability to pay them back is not considered at all. That's the hate part, right? So they'll let you take out as much as you want to fulfill the ultimate cost. So if we're using the $100,000 as an example for, let's say, an in-state school over a 4-year period, and the student, let's say, can only get 25,000, that $75,000 gap, the parents will be able to apply for and ultimately get the entire 75,000. Caveat is obviously they have to be credit worthy, but whether or not you can pay that back is a totally different challenge. And it reminds me, as we had talked about before, where people are taking these loans and they don't really figure out, you know, what am I going to do 4 years from now if I can't make the payment, $1,200, $1,400, $1,500? You know, we hear on a daily basis about the canceling of student debt. I don't think that's a reality. And if that's your long-term plan, I think that might be a flawed planning process in regard to how you're going to pay these things back. I also wanted to offer the handouts that that you were so gracious to share with us, as well as for myself. So I'll share yours now. This is the college timeline that we did. So feel free to download that. And then I also have a pretty good overview that Morgan Stanley put together as far as 529s. You know, how do they work? You know, is it state specific? What's the best way to sort of continue to save in those programs? And then ultimately, you know, where else potentially it's not the be all and end all of saving for college. And so we can obviously have much more in-depth discussions about that if anybody is willing to take those calls or opportunities. So I don't see any other questions here. I know we're a little bit early, which is great. I love to finish on time. But I do want to thank everybody that came on tonight. Eleanor, what's the best way for them to contact you if other than going to your website?
So you can reach me by email. It's simply Eleonora. I will put it in, I can't put it in chat. If you actually, Sal, if you
yeah, I'll put it in there. Let's see.
So it's just Eleonora at spshcoaching.com. So it stands for Square Peg, Square Hole. So you can reach me that way. Or, of course, you can always call or text me. My number is 631-629-5568. If you click on my college timeline, you can find all that information right on the bottom of that. So you not only get a nice handout, you get the way to find me as well.
Awesome. And I'm going to share my own as well. It's my email address, and my phone number is coming up now. All right, so I appreciate everybody attending tonight. This was great. Thank you again, Eleanor, for joining me. I'm looking forward to many more of these. We're going to try and run these on a regular basis, possibly on a quarterly basis. And if you have anyone that you thought was going to be on tonight's call and didn't make it, or a friend and family member that you think might benefit from this presentation, just let me know, and we can share the recording from tonight's webinar. All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Have a great
All
night.
right,
Thanks
thank
again,
you. Have a good
Eleanor.
night.
Okay. Bye-bye.